Hello students, how are you doing? I hope you all are fine and having fun in life. So are you people ready to start the new topic? Yes, we are going to learn about today history and its importance. This is our today's topic. Okay, so what are the learning part? We are going to learn about time frame, sources of knowing about Indian history, the changing nomenclature of the subcontinent and regions, and overview of the period. And plus we are going to learn major changes during this period, right? So are you people ready to start? Okay, let's start. And now we will know about the history, okay, and its importance. History is certainly about changes that occur over time. It is about finding out how things were in the past and how things have changed since. As soon as we compare the past with the present, we refer to time. We talk of before and after. Living in the present world, we do not always ask questions about what we see around us. We take things for granted as if what we see has always been there. But most of us have our moments of wonder when we are curious and we ask questions that actually are historical. Watching someone sip a cup of tea at a roadside tea stall, you may wonder, when did people begin to drink tea or coffee? When were railways built? And how did people travel long distances before the advent of railways? Reading the newspaper in the morning, you may be curious to know how people got to hear about things going around before newspapers began to be printed. Are you really curious to know about all this, or are you wonder about? All such historical questions refer us back to notions of time, but time does not have to be always precisely dated in terms of a particular year or a month. Sometimes it is actually incorrect, to fix precise dates to processes that happen over a period of time. People in India did not begin drinking tea one fine day. They developed a taste for it over time. There can be no one clear, date for a process such as this. Similarly, we cannot fix one single date on which British rule was established, or the national movement started, or changes took place within the economy and society. All these things happened over a stretch of time. We can only refer to a span, of time, an approximate period over which particular changes became visible. Now we will learn about time frame, or let's read about time frame. There was a time when history was an account of battles and big events. It was about rulers and their policies. Historians wrote about the year a king was crowned, the year he married, the year he had a child, the year he fought a particular war, the year he died, and the year the next ruler succeeded to the throne. For events as these, specific dates can be determined, and in historiography, debates about dates continue to be important. As you have seen in the history books of the past 2 years, historians now write about a host of other issues questions. They look at how people earned their livelihood, what they produced and ate, how cities developed and markets came up, and how kingdoms were formed and new ideas spread, and how cultures and society underwent change. Which dates? By what criteria do we choose to date something relating the history? The dates we select, the dates around which we compose our story of the past, are an important on their own. They become vital because we focus on a particular set of events as important. If our focus of study changes, if we begin to look at new issues, a new set of dates will appear significant. Consider an example. In the historical accounts written by British historians in India, the rule of each governor general was important. These histories begin with the rule of first governor general Warren Hastings and ended with the last viceroy Lord Mountbatten. In separate chapters, we read about the deeds of others: Hastings, Wellesley, Bentinck, Dalhousie, Canning, Lawrence, Lytton, and Ripon, Curzon, Harding, Irvine, and others. It was a seemingly, a never-ending succession of governor, generals, and viceroys. And all the dates in these histories books were linked to these personalities, to their activities, policies, and achievements. It was as if there was nothing outside their lives that was important for us to know. The chronology of their lives marked the different chapters of the history of British India. Did you know? Warren Hastings became the first Governor General in India in 1773. An overview of the period. In 1817, James Mill, a Scottish economist and political philosopher, published a massive 3-volume work, a history of British India. In this, he divided Indian history into 3 periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British periods. This periodization has come to the widely accepted. Thinking short, do you think of any problem with this way of looking at Indian history? Mill thought that all Asian societies were at a lower level of civilization than Europe. In his telling of history, before the British arrived in India, Hindu and Muslims, they despots ruled the country. Religious intolerance, caste taboos, and superstitious practices dominated the social life. British rule, Mill felt, helped civilized India, to do this, and it was necessary to introduce European manners, arts, institutions, and laws in India. Mill, in fact, suggested that the British should conquer all the territories in India to ensure the enlightenment of, and happiness of Indian people. According to Mill, India was not capable of progress without the British help. In this idea of history, British rule represented all the forces of progress and civilization. The period before British rule was unenlightened and one of the darkness. Moving away from British classification, historians have usually divided Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. This division too has its problems. It is a periodization that is borrowed from the West, where the modern period was associated with the growth of all the forces of modernity: science, reason, democracy, liberty, and equality. Medieval was a term used to describe a society where these features of modern society were absent. Can we uncritically accept this characterization of the modern period to describe the period of our study? As you will see in this book, under British rule, the people did not have equality, freedom, or liberty. Nor was the period one of the economic growth and progress. Many historians therefore refer to this period as colonial, devoid of these modern values. What is colonial? The British came to conquer the country and establish their rule, subjugating local nawabs and rajas. They established control over the economy and society, collected revenue to meet all their expenses, bought the goods they wanted at much lower prices, produced crops they needed for export. They brought about changes in values and tastes, customs and practices. When the subjugation of one country by another idea, leads to these kinds of political, economic, social and cultural changes, we refer to the process as colonization. Let's do it. If you were given an opportunity to write the history of India, on what basis will you divide the Indian history into different periods? Okay, do this. Sources to know about Indian history. A large bulk of sources, including written records in English and regional languages, are available for the modern period of Indian history. These include both administrative and non-administrative sources. Let's take a brief look at the important sources to have a better understanding of how they are useful. Administrative sources. These sources are written records of the British rule in India prepared by administrators, officials and historians appointed by the colonial government. These are mainly of two types. One is official records and another is different surveys. Let's read about official records first. Official records of the British administration are a very important sources, as the British believed that every instruction, plan, policy, decision, agreement and investigation had to be clearly written. This recording was considered very important, and so there emerged an administrative culture of preparing documents for internal communication, notings, and reports. Record rooms attached to administrative institutions were set up, as they felt all important documents and letters need to be preserved. Archives and museums were also set up to preserve records and letters and memos that moved from one branch of the administration to another in the early years of the 19th century can still be read in the archives. We can also study the notes and reports that district officials prepared, or the instructions and directives that were sent by officials at the top to provincial administrators. In the early years of the 19th century, these documents were carefully copied out by and beautifully written by calligraphists. By the middle of the 19th century, with thus separate of printing, several copies of these records were printed and handed over to each government department. And then you have one picture also of this a piece of writing. You can say showing the skill of calligraphy, this piece of writing. So did you know a chronicler is a person who writes accounts of important or historical events? Kalhan is regarded as the first Indian chronicler of Indian history, and his famous history work is Ras Tarangini, a Sanskrit text written during 1148 to 1149 and tracing the history of Kashmir from earliest times to the 12th century. Reports of the Home Department. In 1946, the colonial government in India was trying to put down a mutiny by rating sailors who are not officers of the Royal Indian Navy. Here is a sample of the kind of reports the Home Department got from the different dockyards. Bombay, arrangements have been made for the army to take over ships and establishment. Royal Navy ships are remaining outside the harbour. Karachi, 301 mutineers are under arrest and a few more strongly suspected are to be arrested. All establishments are under military guard. Now Visakhapatnam, this is the positions completely under control and no violence has occurred. Military guards have been placed on ships and establishment. No further trouble is expected except that a few men may refuse to work. Director to Intelligence, Headquarter, India Command Situation Report number 7, file number 52146, Home Political Government of India. Did you know? When New Delhi was built, the National Museum and the National Archives were both located close to the Viceregal place, that palace. And this location reflects the importance these institutions had in the British scheme of things. And now we read about surveys. These were also given a lot of importance by the British because they believed that the surveys would enable them to effectively administer the country and know the people better. By the early 19th century, detailed surveys were being carried out to map the entire country. In the villages, revenue surveys was, those were conducted, and the purpose was to know the topography, soil quality, plants and animals of different localities besides their histories and cropping patterns. All the facts necessary to administer the region. From the end of 19th century, 1881, census operations were held after every 10 years. These helped the British officials prepare detailed records of the number of people in all the provinces in India. Right? And did you know that the census surveys includes reports on the size and distribution of population and its nature based on age, occupation, sex, caste, religion, and etc. Non-administrative sources. A large number of magazines, journals, newspapers, and books were published during this period following the invention of the printing press. Biographies and autobiographies. A number of biographies were written by important people during this period. Several autobiographies were also written by both important and ordinary people. Among these, writers, there were also many talented women. They criticized the social differences between men and women. One of the most important writers of this period was Tarabai Shinde, who wrote Stri Purush Tulna. Now we have to read about literary and political writings. Many short stories, plays and novels were written during this period, and one of the early historical novels in Bengali was Budeb Mukhopadhyay's Anguriya Binimoy. Sarat Chandra Chatterjee used to tell stories in simple language, who made him very popular. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee was another great Bengali novelist of this period. However, the greatest of all who wrote in Bengali was none other than Rabindranath Tagore, popularly known as Kavi Guru or Gurudev. Among other great writers of this period, Munshi Premchand pioneered a new era in the history of modern Indian novel and short stories. His novels are filled with all kinds of powerful characters drawn from all levels of society. His Hindi novel, Godan, is like an epic of Indian peasantry. It talks the British period. Novels were written in different languages. Indulekha was the first modern novel in Malayalam. Books that contain speeches of important leaders like Nehru or Gandhi are also very important sources. Newspapers, periodicals and magazines. So these are very important sources. They include editorials, cartoons, news and letters. They throw light on various perspectives of society. Among the earliest newspapers in India, like Mirat al-Akbar, founded by Ram Mohan Roy and published in Persian, and Kesari, founded by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, are well known. As printing spread, newspapers were published and issues were debated in public. Leaders and reformers wrote to spread their ideas. Poets and novelists wrote to express their feelings. And films. Now we have to read about films. Documentary and feature films help us to know the history. They appeal to public greatly as they are very important sources of entertainment. Dada Saheb Phalke was one of the pioneers of Indian cinema. Films like Patthar Panchali by Satyajit Ray and present the true picture of Bengalis' famine and rural life during the colonial period. Similarly, historical films like Shaheed Bhagat Singh, Gandhi, the making of the Mahatma and Mangal Pandey and Kesari make our sources of history come alive. Now through maps, maps of towns, cities, villages, coastal areas, roads, rivers, bridges and railways tracks were made by the British. These all are made by the British. They are very useful at present to know about different kinds of rural and urban settlements in British India. Architectural sources: the India Gate, Rashtrapati Bhavan, Parliament House and Connaught Place built by architect Dio Sir Edwin Lutyens by Herbert Baker offer an insight into the art and architecture of the period under study. Now others. Photographs give us a true picture of different historical events and leaders. Paintings of Bharat Mata in different styles reflect the progress in the attitudes of Indian nationalists of this period, and so paintings of various kinds are a very important source. And now advertisements give these advertisements give us an idea about the kind of products sold and how they were made, appealing to the people. Radio broadcast of important leaders, speeches, Nehru's tryst with destiny and speech on the eve of the Independence Day, and songs are preserved. Songs like Vande Mataram, Rang De Basanti, Amar, Shonar Bangla, Kadam Kadam, Badai Ja, etc. are preserved in the radio archives. Besides the above mentioned sources, there are direct sources which are stories told to us by our grandparents and great grandparents who were witnesses to the freedom movements. They too give us the true picture of the time. Thinking short, what kind of records do you think the British would have kept? Major changes during this period. One of the most significant events that took place during modern period was what historians call the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a term used for important changes and progress in the fields of agriculture, manufacturing, mining, transport and technology that occurred in Europe between the later half of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. These changes affected the social, economic and cultural lives in different countries of Europe. The Industrial Revolution started in England and spread throughout Europe, North America and the rest of the world. In England and elsewhere, almost every aspect of daily life was influenced in some way or the other by the progress brought about the Industrial Revolution. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, England's industrial production increased much more than ever before in the past. So, England stopped importing goods and products from outside. Instead, England now felt the need of expand the market to sell industrial goods beyond its own shores. As goods were produced in bulk, they were cheaper than handmade goods. With the aim to search for more markets, the English East India Company was founded in England in 1600. Thomas Roe, the envoy of the British King James I to the court of Mughal Emperor Jahangir, secured trading rights for the traders and merchants of his country. After about a century, a later Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar granted important trading rights to English merchants through a royal firman. Gradually, the East India Company took over the total control over India's economy. society and culture, turning into India into a British colony. Now we have the, following the Industrial Revolution, a competition began among the European powers to explore and build colonies that would serve as markets for products made in their respective countries and also supply resources to support industrial production in the imperialist countries. As a result, India became a colony of the British Empire. After 1757, the first time that many provincial rulers of India, supported by their people, revolted against the British was in 1857. As we shall read later, the revolt of 1857 was brutally suppressed. But even before the revolt, the people living in different regions of India had realized that if they stood united, it was possible to overthrow the British. With this thought, a great love for the nation and desire to get independence from the foreign rule rose among the Indian people. It came to be known as nationalism. The first great expression of Indian nationalism was the revolt of 1857. Following the revolt of 1857, there was also transfer of power from the East India Company to the British Crown in 1858. Thus, India came under direct rule of the British government after the revolt of 1857. In 1947, after a long struggle, India finally gained independence from the British rule. Till the 18th century, India was a major exporter of cotton and silk textiles. However, was only to promote the trade of, however, the main purpose, of the East India Company was only to promote the trade of its own products manufactured in England. After the Industrial Revolution, cotton and silk textiles became one of the most important English products. So, by the 19th century, when India was under the British rule, cheap English textiles were imported into India from England. This decreased the sale of Indian textiles and started, the process of deindustrialization, which is the opposite of industrialization. In this way, many traditional Indian industries were destroyed. The final result was that capitalism emerged as the basis of economy. It meant that making profit became the only motive of the imperial power. In this book, we shall read about the ways used by the British to conquer the country and establish their rule. We shall also see how they controlled the economy and society, collected revenue to meet their expenses, bought the goods they wanted at lower prices, and produced crops they needed for export. Moreover, we shall understand the changes brought about the British in values, tastes, customs, habits and practices of India. Now, the changing nomenclature of subcontinent and regions. The Indian subcontinent includes India and its neighbors versus Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives and Sri Lanka. It is almost like a continent and its geographical features are different from the rest of Asia. It is surrounded by three water bodies, the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. It is interesting to know that during the British rule, the term India was used not only for the country but also for most of what we call the Indian subcontinent today. As the map on the previous page shows, there were no fixed borders or boundaries at that time in between our country and its neighbors like Afghanistan, Nepal and even Burma, now Myanmar. Among other neighbors, Pakistan came into existence only during the last days of the British rule, while Bangladesh, earlier known as East Pakistan, achieved nationhood in 1971. Instead of national boundaries, there were regional or provincial boundaries dividing various states ruled by their own rulers. Gradually, as the British became the strongest political power, most of the states shown in the map on previous page came under their direct rule. Since India was under the British rule, it was named the British India. Let's do it. Prepare a project file on your family tracing the developments in terms of social, economic, religious and technological changes that have taken place since your grandfather's time. You may take help of your family members. Now students, this chapter information is, maybe this is very useful for you. Maybe you were very attentive. Now based on the information you have gained from this chapter, you have to do all these exercises. You have to attempt the questions. Like in the first one, you have to take the correct answer. Among the 4 options are given. Among all these options, you have to pick the correct one. Fill in the gaps. These gaps you have to fill with the correct word. You have to choose that from the chapter only. Write true or false. You have to check the statement. If you find the statement true, write T, otherwise write F. Answer the following questions briefly. You have to mention them in brief, okay, and maybe 3, 4, 5 lines. And you have to answer the following questions in detail in 5th question. And you have to describe these answers, right? In detail you have to mention them. Skills enrichment zone, you have to do fun activity, organize and participate in the group discussion on the topic valuable sources of history. Search work, you have to give an account of any 2 historical buildings of the British period in your state. Activity, talk about any elder member of your family to find out about her or his life. You can question him on the following: place and year of birth. You can ask about name of parents and grandparents. You can ask about his or her education and friends, dreams and aspirations, job, life then and now. Out of the box. What is the problem with periodization of Indian history that James Mill offers? And all inventions are not good for mankind. How? Think about and enjoy. Have fun.